Before we begin, I want you to close your eyes for just 1 second. Imagine a man who has spent his entire life being told he is too much, too sensitive, too soft for the world he was born into. Now imagine that same man driving down a long, empty Texas highway, windows down, heart empty, convinced that love was something that happened to other people, not to him, never to him. This is the story of Marcus, and of Eli, and of the kind of love that does not announce itself, the kind that sneaks up on you like a summer storm, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Stay with me, this one is going to move you. Marcus Reyes had always been good at leaving. He had left Houston at 22, right after his mother's funeral, stuffing everything he owned into 2 duffel bags and a cracked leather backpack. He left his college roommate behind, the one who had kissed him once by the swimming pool and then pretended it never happened. He left behind the version of himself that used to cry in the car so nobody would see. He was 31 now, and he had made a kind of peace with being alone. Not a happy peace, more like the peace of a man who has fought the same war for so long that he simply stopped expecting to win. He worked remotely, doing graphic design for a mid-sized marketing agency out of Austin. His laptop and a decent Wi-Fi signal were all he needed to survive. So when his friend Daria suggested he spend the summer house-sitting her grandmother's property in Harlow County, a small ranching community 2 hours west of San Antonio, Marcus said yes before she even finished the sentence. He needed air, he needed quiet, he needed to be somewhere that had no memory of him. He arrived on a Tuesday in late May when the heat was already thick and personal, the kind that pressed against your skin like it wanted something from you. The property was beautiful in a rough, unpretentious way, a white farmhouse with a sagging porch, a barn that smelled of old hay and motor oil, 36 acres of land that rolled out in every direction like a slow exhale. Daria had warned him about one thing. My grandmother has a handyman, his name is Eli. He comes 3 days a week to maintain the property. He's a little private, just leave him to his work and he'll leave you to yours. Marcus had nodded and thought nothing of it. He met Eli on his second morning there. Marcus was on the porch with his coffee, watching the sun climb over the flat horizon, when he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. A faded blue pickup truck rolled to a stop near the barn. The door opened slowly, and a man eased himself out with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who had learned to negotiate with his own body. Eli Calloway was somewhere in his mid-30s, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that curled at the temples where sweat had already begun to gather. He wore a gray shirt with the sleeves cut off, worn jeans, and boots that had seen entire seasons of hard use. His left arm hung slightly differently than his right, and he moved with a subtle but noticeable lean, compensating for something in his lower left side. Marcus learned later that a rodeo accident 4 years ago had partially damaged the nerves along Eli's left side, leaving him with limited sensation and reduced mobility in his left leg and partial weakness in his left arm. He was not wheelchair-bound, he was not fragile, but he was different from the man he had been before, and Marcus could sense, even from a distance, that this difference cost him something every single day. Eli looked up and saw Marcus on the porch. He did not wave, he did not smile. He gave a single brief nod, the way men in that part of Texas acknowledged the existence of other men, and then he turned and walked into the barn. Marcus sipped his coffee. Okay then, he thought, private, got it. But curiosity, Marcus had learned, was one of his least controllable qualities. Over the following 3 days, he found himself watching Eli work, not in a strange or intrusive way, just noticing. The way Eli adapted every task to work around his limitations without ever making the limitations the point. The way he used his stronger right arm as the primary force and let his left serve as a brace or guide. The way he paused sometimes, standing still in the middle of the barn or beside the fence line, eyes distant, like he was having a conversation with himself that nobody else was invited to. He never asked for help. Marcus respected that, even as some part of him wanted to offer it. On the 4th day, the water pump behind the barn stopped working. Marcus knew nothing about water pumps, but he had watched enough of Eli's quiet competence to feel embarrassed about his own uselessness on the property. He found himself standing next to the pump, staring at it like it might explain itself, when he heard footsteps behind him. You touch anything? Eli's voice was low and dry, like gravel warmed by the sun. No, Marcus said, I know my limits. Something shifted in Eli's expression, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. Good, Eli said. He crouched beside the pump with the slow ease of a man who had learned not to rush his own body. He examined the connections, tested a valve, and within 4 minutes had diagnosed a cracked seal. "I'll bring a replacement Thursday," he said, standing back up. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. Eli looked at him with an expression that was not hostile but was certainly not open. "Sure," he said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "How long have you been working this property?" A pause. 6 years. "Did you know Daria's grandmother well?" "Well enough." Another pause. "She was kind." Marcus nodded. The old woman had passed 8 months ago. Daria had mentioned it with a grief that was still tender at the edges. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said simply. Eli looked at him for a moment longer than expected. Then he picked up his toolbox and walked back to his truck. Marcus stood by the broken pump and felt something he could not immediately name. Like a door had been opened 1 inch and then closed again, and he was not sure whether to knock or walk away. He decided, quietly and without fully admitting it to himself, that he would knock. He started leaving water on the fence post nearest the barn on the days Eli came. Just a cold bottle, nothing dramatic. The first time Eli left it untouched. The second time it was gone when Marcus came back in the afternoon, and the empty bottle was set neatly beside the post. The third time Eli looked up from his work across the yard and gave Marcus that same minimal nod, but held it half a second longer than before. Marcus took that half second and held it close, like a small ember he did not want to lose. He began to understand that Eli was a man who communicated in measurements of silence, the length of a pause, the weight of a glance. The deliberate absence of words that, in other men, might have been filled with noise. Marcus had always been drawn to that kind of quiet. He had grown up in a house where everyone spoke too much and meant too little. Eli's silences felt like they meant something. But there was also something else. On the second week, Marcus was stretching on the porch in the early morning when Eli arrived earlier than usual. Eli did not see him at first, and Marcus watched as Eli sat in his truck for a long moment before getting out, one hand gripping the steering wheel, eyes closed. His jaw was set. He was breathing slowly and deliberately, like a man preparing to do something hard. Then he opened the door and swung himself out, and the careful ease returned, and he was Eli the handyman again, competent and contained. But Marcus had seen the moment before, the private cost of getting up and trying again. He felt something open in his chest, tender and aching and entirely inconvenient. He thought, "I am going to need to be very careful here." He was not careful. On a Friday evening at the end of his second week, a summer storm rolled in fast from the southwest, the kind that turned the sky the color of a bruise and shook the windows in their frames. Marcus had been trying to secure the barn door, which had been rattling loose, when Eli pulled up unexpectedly. "Storm's worse than the forecast," Eli said, getting out. "Wanted to make sure the south fence holds." They worked side by side in the rising wind, Marcus holding the barn door while Eli secured it with practiced efficiency. When the first sheet of rain came, they both ran for the covered porch of the farmhouse. They stood there, breathing hard, watching the rain turn the yard to mud. And for the first time, Eli laughed. It was a short sound, almost surprised, like it had escaped him. But it was real, and it transformed his face entirely. The controlled stillness cracked open, and underneath was something younger, warmer, and heartbreakingly human. Marcus stared at him. Eli caught him staring and looked away, but the almost smile remained. "You're not what I expected," Eli said, eyes on the rain. "What did you expect?" Marcus asked. "City person, coming out here to play at quiet living for a summer." Marcus considered this. "That's not entirely wrong." "No," Eli agreed, "but it's not entirely right either." The rain came down harder. Neither of them moved to go inside. They stood there on that old porch, 2 feet apart, while the storm did what storms do, which is to say everything it wanted and nothing that was asked of it. Marcus thought later that this was the moment it truly began. Not the water bottles on the fence post, not the cracked pump, not even Eli's rare escaped laugh. It was the staying, both of them standing in the storm when either one could have gone inside. The choosing to remain. After the storm, something changed between them. Nothing was said about it. Nothing was agreed upon. But the distance that had existed before, that careful, measured space that Eli kept around himself like a second skin, began to have a small door in it. Eli started arriving a few minutes earlier on his work days, not early enough to be noticeable if you were not paying attention, but Marcus was paying attention. He noticed the way Eli's eyes moved to the porch first before going to the barn. He noticed that the brief nod had been replaced slowly and almost reluctantly by something closer to a real acknowledgement, a slight ease in the shoulders, a moment of eye contact that lasted. Marcus did not push. He had learned in whatever way life teaches its harder lessons that some people are like wild things. They come to you only when you are still enough, when you make yourself safe. He made himself safe. They began talking in the mornings, short conversations at first, practical and grounded. The condition of the south fence, the best way to manage the property's irrigation during drought season, whether the old tractor in the barn was worth repairing or should finally be retired. Marcus knew nothing about any of these things, and he said so plainly, and Eli seemed to appreciate the honesty more than he might have appreciated false competence. He began explaining things, pointing things out, walking Marcus through the small mechanics of rural life with a patience that was entirely at odds with his first impression. Marcus listened. He asked questions, not to fill the silence but because he was genuinely interested, and Eli could feel the difference. One morning, about 3 weeks into Marcus's stay, they were repairing a section of wooden fence when Eli's left hand slipped and he dropped the hammer. It landed in the dirt. Eli looked at his hand with an expression that Marcus recognized immediately because he had worn it himself once, looking at the pages of a book he could not finish, a project he could not complete, a version of himself he could no longer reach. It was grief, quiet and familiar and very tired. Marcus bent down, picked up the hammer and held it out. Eli looked at it, then at Marcus. He was waiting, Marcus understood, for the thing people usually did next, the expression of pity, the slightly too gentle voice, the moment where they made his limitation into a story about themselves. Marcus just held the hammer out, steady and patient. Eli took it. "Thank you," he said. His voice was even, but something in his eyes was not. "Of course," Marcus said and turned back to the fence. That evening, Eli did not leave when his work was done. He sat on the porch steps while Marcus brought out 2 glasses of iced tea, and for the first time, the silence between them was entirely comfortable. The kind of silence you can only reach with someone after you have passed through enough of the other kind. "Can I ask you something now?" Eli said. "Sure," Marcus said. "Why did you come out here, and I mean really, not the house-sitting story?" Marcus looked out at the last light burning orange along the horizon. He thought about lying. He was good at lying in the comfortable, self-protective way, but something about the straightness of Eli's question made dishonesty feel like an insult. "I was tired," Marcus said, "tired of living in places where I had to perform, where being myself felt like something I had to constantly justify." Eli was quiet for a moment. "I know that feeling." "I imagine you do," Marcus said carefully, not assuming, not projecting, just leaving the door open. Eli turned the glass in his hands. "The rodeo world is not the most welcoming place for a lot of different reasons." Marcus nodded slowly. "I was somebody different before the accident," Eli continued. "Not better, just louder. I took up more space. I thought that was the same as being strong." He paused. "I know better now." "What do you know now?" Marcus asked softly. Eli looked at him. "That real strength is quiet. That it costs more than people think, and that most people cannot handle it." They stayed out until the stars came up. Marcus did not tell Eli that he was gay that night. He did not need to. Some understandings do not require words. They exist in the spaces between them, in what is not said but is entirely felt. What Marcus did feel walking back inside that night was something dangerously close to hope. He had not felt hope in a long time. It frightened him. He sat at his laptop and stared at an unfinished design project for a long time, not working, just thinking about how Eli had looked at him when they talked. The quality of that attention, full and undefended, like a man who had decided at some point he kept to himself to stop pretending. Marcus thought, "I could fall in love with him." Then he thought, "He is going to break your heart." Then he thought, "Maybe it is worth it." Then he closed his laptop and went to bed and told himself firmly that he was being ridiculous, that this was a summer situation and nothing more, and that he was a grown man of 31 who did not need another complicated heartbreak. He did not believe himself, not even a little. The following week, Eli invited him to town. It was practical, he said. He needed to pick up supplies, and the hardware store was next to the only decent diner for 40 miles. And did Marcus want lunch while he was at it? Marcus said yes before Eli finished the sentence. The town of Harlow was the kind of small that meant everyone knew everyone and most people had opinions about everything. Marcus was aware, walking beside Eli down the main street, that they drew a certain kind of attention, not hostile mostly, but watchful. The kind of watchfulness that happens in places where differences are noted and filed away. Eli moved through it with the ease of long practice. He greeted people by name. He was respected here, that was clear. His injury had not taken that from him. But Marcus also noticed the way some men looked at Eli with a combination of sympathy and relief that made something protective flare up in Marcus's chest. Like they were glad it had happened to Eli and not to them. Like his limitation made them feel safer in their own wholeness. Marcus hated them for it quietly and said nothing. At the diner, they sat across from each other in a booth and ordered coffee and the lunch special, and it was the most ordinary thing Marcus had done in months and somehow also the most extraordinary. They talked for 2 hours. They talked about music, about the particular loneliness of small-town life versus the particular loneliness of city life, which were different animals entirely. They talked about Eli's family, 2 brothers and a sister, and parents who were alive but distant in the way that families become when no one knows how to talk about the important things. They talked about Marcus's mother, who had died when he was 22 of a sudden heart attack, and how he still sometimes thought of things he wanted to tell her. Eli listened to all of it with the same quality of attention Marcus had noticed before, complete, unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be and nothing was more important than this. Marcus looked across the diner table at this man, this quiet, complicated, careful man with the dust still on his boots and the old grief behind his eyes, and he thought, oh, this is already too late. On the drive back, Eli's truck hit a rough patch of road and his grip tightened on the wheel, and Marcus instinctively reached out and placed his hand briefly on Eli's forearm. Just for a second, just a steadying touch. Eli did not pull away. They did not talk about it. But that night, Marcus sat on the porch alone and pressed his hand to his chest and thought about how another person's warmth could stay in your skin long after the touch itself was gone. He thought about what Daria had said, leave him to his work. He thought about what his own instincts had said from the very first morning, knock. He thought about all the ways this could hurt him. He decided, as he had been deciding in small ways all along, that he was going to stay present. That he was going to stop running, at least for this one summer, and see what happened when he let something be what it was without deciding in advance that it was going to end badly. It was the bravest decision Marcus Reyes had made in years. He did not know yet that Eli had made the same one. There is a particular quality to late summer in South Texas. The heat does not break so much as it slowly, reluctantly begins to release its grip. The mornings come with just a breath of something cooler in them, a hint of the season turning, and everything on the land seems aware of it. The light changes, the sounds change, the shadows grow longer and softer, and the world takes on the particular feeling of something being held carefully before it lets go. Marcus had been at the Harlow property for 8 weeks when Eli showed up on a Sunday, which was not one of his usual work days. Marcus was reading on the porch when the blue truck came up the drive. He watched Eli get out with that careful deliberateness that Marcus had long since stopped seeing as limitation and now saw simply as Eli. The way he moved was part of him. It told the story of everything he had survived and everything he had rebuilt. Eli came to the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps. I don't have work today, he said. I know, Marcus said. I came because I wanted to, Eli said. He said it plainly, like a man who had rehearsed saying it 10 times and was finally saying it the 11th. Marcus set his book down, then come sit down. Eli came up the steps and sat in the second chair, the one that had gradually and without discussion become his chair, and they sat together in the Sunday morning quiet. After a while Eli said, I need to tell you something. Marcus waited. When you first got here, Eli said, I told myself you were just another temporary person. People come out to places like this when they want to feel something for a while, then they go back to wherever they came from. He paused. I decided I wasn't going to let you matter to me. Marcus's throat tightened, and I did a very bad job of that, Eli said. Marcus looked at him. Eli was looking at the yard, at the morning light on the dry grass, at anything that was not Marcus's face. His jaw was set in that particular way it got when he was doing something that cost him. Eli, Marcus said quietly. Eli finally looked at him. I know what it is to build walls, Marcus said. I built some impressive ones. I know what it is to decide in advance that something is going to hurt you so you never give it the chance to be anything else. He leaned forward slightly. I stopped doing that about 6 weeks ago when you laughed in the rain. Something broke open in Eli's expression. I'm not easy, Eli said. My life is not easy. I have days when my body doesn't do what I ask it to and I get angry and I'm not good company. I have a lot of silence in me. I don't know how to be the kind of person who, he stopped. The kind of person who what? Marcus asked gently. Who deserves someone like you, Eli said, quiet and direct and devastating. Marcus stood up from his chair. He crossed the 2 feet between them and crouched down in front of Eli's chair, making himself level, meeting his eyes straight on. Let me tell you what I see, Marcus said. I see a man who shows up every single time. I see a man who has rebuilt himself after losing something enormous and who is still standing and still working and still extending small kindnesses to people who leave water on fence posts. His voice was steady. I see a man I have been falling in love with since approximately the 2nd week of June, and I would very much like to stop pretending otherwise. The morning was very quiet. Eli reached out with his right hand, the stronger one, and placed it against the side of Marcus's face. His touch was careful, like he was holding something he did not want to break. I'm scared, Eli said. Me too, Marcus said. I'm terrified, but I'm here. And that was all that needed to be said. They stayed on the porch as the morning stretched into afternoon. Eli told Marcus about the accident in full for the first time in a long time. He described what it had felt like to wake up in the hospital and understand that the body he had known was changed permanently. The months of physical therapy, the loss of his rodeo career, which had been not just a profession but an identity, the way some people who had loved him before had slowly, apologetically disappeared. The relearning of every simple thing, how to grip, how to walk without compensating into pain, how to live inside a body that felt like a stranger's for a very long time. Marcus listened to all of it without interrupting, without fixing, without making it smaller. When Eli was done, he looked spent in the way people look when they have finally put down something they have been carrying alone for too long. Marcus reached over and took his hand, the left one, the one with the reduced feeling, and held it between both of his own. You are still the strongest person I have ever been near, Marcus said, and I don't mean physically. Eli turned their hands over, looking at them. How much longer are you here? Through September, Marcus said. Eli was quiet, and then. It was the question Marcus had been turning over for weeks, the question he had been building toward without admitting it. I've been thinking about that, Marcus said. I work remotely, I can work from anywhere. He paused. I could work from here. Eli looked at him. That's a significant thing to say. I know, Marcus said. I'm not saying it casually. You'd be saying it for me, Eli said, not accusatory, just precise. I'd be saying it for us, Marcus said, if there's an us, which is what I'm hopping. Eli was quiet for a long time. Marcus let him be quiet. He had learned that Eli's silences were not empty. They were full of everything he was working through carefully, the way he worked through everything. There have been people before, Eli said finally. Men, 1 or 2. I was not out in any public way. I'm still not sure I know how to be. He said it without shame but with full honesty. This place has certain expectations. I've lived in this county my whole life. I know, Marcus said. I am not asking you to be anything other than what you are. I'm not asking you to announce yourself. I'm just asking you to let me stay. Eli looked at him for a long moment. The morning light was full on both their faces now, generous and warm. I've been alone for 4 years, Eli said. Since the accident, told myself I preferred it. He paused. I did not prefer it. No, Marcus agreed gently. I don't think you did. I don't want to be alone anymore, Eli said. He said it like a man closing a very long chapter. Marcus leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Eli's. They stayed like that for a moment, just breathing, just being present in the same place at the same time, which is, when you think about it, the whole of what love asks for first. Then Eli laughed again, that same short, surprised sound that had first opened something in Marcus's chest, and this time it did not stop as quickly. It grew, and Marcus laughed with him, and the two of them sat on that old porch on a Sunday morning in South Texas and laughed together until the sound of it went out across the yard and into the warm, still air. In the weeks that followed, they built something quietly and deliberately, the way Eli did everything. They were careful with each other in the way of people who understand that good things require tending. Marcus began to learn the rhythms of the land because Eli knew them. Eli began to let Marcus into the parts of his days he had always kept sealed because Marcus made it feel like not a risk. There were hard days, days when Eli's body refused him and his frustration was a wall Marcus had to wait on the outside of. Marcus waited, always. He never made Eli's difficult days into his own. He understood that there was a difference between being there for someone and making their struggle about yourself. And there were good days. Days when they drove out to the edge of the property at sunset and sat on the tailgate of the blue truck and watched the light die over the horizon in colors so extravagant they seemed like a kind of showing off. Days when they cooked together in the farmhouse kitchen with the radio going and the windows open and the evening coming in slow and golden. Days when Marcus was deep in work at his laptop and looked up to find Eli watching him from the doorway with an expression so openly tender it made Marcus's chest feel too full. Marcus did not go back to Austin in September. He called his landlord and ended his lease. He shipped his remaining things to Harlow County. He told Daria, who laughed and said she was not surprised and that her grandmother would have approved. It was not a dramatic decision. It was the quietest, most deliberate choice Marcus had ever made. The choice to stop treating his own happiness like something that could wait. On the first truly cool evening of October, when the air finally had some mercy in it and the stars were out in full, Marcus and Eli sat together on the porch. Marcus had his legs over the arm of his chair in a way that drove Eli gently crazy. Eli had his coffee, the one real luxury he permitted himself each evening. "I thought you were using me," Marcus said out of nowhere. Eli looked at him. "What?" "Early on, when you first started opening up a little, I thought, this man is lonely and I am convenient, and when I leave he will go back to his walls and none of this will have mattered." Eli was quiet. "And now?" Marcus smiled. "Now I think you were just as scared as I was, and you were as bad at pretending you didn't care as I was." Eli looked at him for a moment with that full, unhurried attention that Marcus had come to think of as the most intimate thing a person could offer another person. "I was terrified of you," Eli said simply, "from almost the beginning." "Why?" "Because I could see that you were the kind of person who could make me want things I'd given up on." Marcus stood up and crossed to Eli's chair and sat on the arm of it, and Eli wrapped his right arm around him and Marcus leaned in close and they looked out at the dark land and the river of stars above it. "Don't give up on things," Marcus said. "I'm not," Eli said, "not anymore." The land was quiet and enormous around them. The old farmhouse was warm at their backs. Somewhere out in the dark, a night bird was calling and the Texas evening was doing what it always did, holding everything it knew close, saying nothing about it, keeping its own counsel. But if you had been there, standing at the edge of that porch looking in at those two men together, you would have known without being told. You would have recognized it immediately. It looked exactly like the beginning of the rest of their lives.